Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahweh Shai, Bahasham Racha Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today, we're going to go into the book of Job, the 26th chapter. But Job answered and said, "How hast thou helped him that is without power?" Or how hast thou helped him that is without power? How savest thou the arm that hath no strength? How hast thou counseled him that hath no wisdom? And how hast thou plentifully declared the thing as it is? To whom hast thou uttered these words, and whose spirit came from thee? And Job is sarcastically speaking here. And it shows forth a bit more when we read these in the other translations, right? In the NLT. So his response to, was it Bildad? Bildad's, I guess, comment was this, right? So as he says here, NLT, how you have helped the powerless, how you have saved the weak. Slakia. Verse 3 says, how you have enlightened my stupidity. What wise advice you have offered. Verse 4, where have you gotten all these wise sayings? And once again, he's being sarcastic here. Whose spirit speaks through you, right? So he's saying, oh, wow, that was so deep. That was so profound, right? That was so heavy, that you just dropped some deep knowledge on me. And then here, Job basically speaks on the greatness, as it says, of God in his response to say, like, yeah, I know the power of God. I know how great he is. You're telling me these things like I don't already know it, right? So it says here, verse 5, dead things are formed from under the waters and the inhabitants thereof. Now, this can sound a bit confusing, but when we look into a couple of these words, firstly, the word formed, all right, as it says here, is one of the definitions here is to tremble, to travail, to be in anguish. All right, so this is speaking about the power of the Lord. But if we look at this in the NLT, right, it says, the dead tremble, those who live beneath the waters. Now, it's not talking about like the people living actually in the waters, right, or beneath the waters. But it's like a way of referring to the underworld, right, or the place where the dead abide. And it's saying here that even those that are dead, right, and those that are in the underworld, so to speak, tremble, right, at the presence of the Lord, right. So when it says that things are formed, okay, from under the waters and the inhabitants thereof, the word formed there goes into tremble, right, or to travail. So the inhabitants of it, even they fear and tremble before the Lord. Hell, because remember, he's going into the greatness of God, right? Hell, so a lot of these, so I keep making these points, but a lot of these here are they're some of them are dark sayings, all right, but most of them are ways of emphasizing the power of God. Hell is naked before him, and destruction hath no covering. He stretcheth out the north over the empty place, which the north being the heavens, right, the sky, as it says, over the empty place, and hangeth the earth upon nothing. In the NLT, it says, God stretches the northern sky over empty space and hangs the earth on nothing, right, referring to when you look at like space, the earth is just there, right? It's just placed there. It's not like, being hung up on something per se. Okay, and actually, let's see what they say here in the for verse 6 as well. It says, the underworld is naked in God's presence. The place of destruction is uncovered, right? Because there's nothing hid from him. So going back, continuing in verse 8, he bindeth up the waters in his thick clouds, and the cloud is not rent under them, right? Meaning like because clouds, is where you get your rain from, right? So it's saying like he bounds up water in the clouds, and yet the clouds don't get so full that they tear open with the water, right? They don't just like burst asunder. And these are all things that it's like impossible things for anybody to do. But in its impossibility, it highlights the power and the majesty and the glory of the Lord. All right. In the NLT, it says, He wraps the rain in his thick clouds, and the clouds don't burst with the weight. He holdeth back the face. Yeah. He holdeth back the face of his throne, and spreadeth his cloud upon it. Okay, and that holding back the face of his throne, as it says in the NKJV, he covers the face of his throne and spreads his cloud over it. And that's just a way of saying that he conceals himself. He hath compassed the waters with bounds until the day and night come to an end, which is going into the foundations of the earth. Right, in the NKJV, he drew a circular horizon on the face of the waters, at the boundary of light and darkness. The pillars of heaven tremble and are astonished at his reproof. Right. So at the rebuke of the Lord, even the foundations of heaven itself tremble. He divideth the sea with his power, and by his understanding he smiteth through the proud. And a couple of things here to note, right? So first, I'll read this in the NKJV. It says, He stirs up the sea with his power, because when you go into that word divided, it goes into that, like it being stirred up. And by his understanding, he breaks up the storm. And when you go into the word, because you'll see the NLT has sea monster, NIV has Rahab, the KJV has proud. And when you go into the word proud here, Rahab, right? There are different uses for it. So it can be used in the sense of referring to one that is proud or prideful or arrogance, or as it says, storm, or mythical sea creature or sea monster. So, when you're reading whatever verse this word is used in, it would mainly depend on the context for you to understand like which definition makes the most sense. And here, right, as the first part of it was talking about the stirring up of the sea, that's why in the NKJV, they have the latter part also referring to the storm here, right? That he breaks up the storm by his understanding, which ultimately goes back to his power and his might, because ain't none of us can do that. By his spirit he hath garnished the heavens. His hand hath formed the crooked serpent. Once again, when you look into some of these words over here, in the NKJV, the garnished, as it says, by his spirit he adorned the heavens. His hand pierced the fleeing serpent. And when you go into the word crooked here, or actually, let's start with formed, right? Because it says he hath formed. You may think of it as like created, but it's actually here, as it says, to desecrate, it says here to profane, but on the lowest part, it says to wound, right? To bore through, to pierce, to be slain, which is more fitting here. And in identifying this crooked serpent, right, when you cross-reference this, you'll notice that there are other precepts that use this term, right? And one of them is, I believe it's in the book of Isaiah, right? Isaiah 27:1. In that day, the Lord with his sore and great and strong sword shall punish Leviathan, the piercing serpent, even Leviathan, that crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea, right? So we also know in prophecy, Esau is likened onto a serpent, right? That crooked, which when you go into that word crooked, it goes into like a fugitive or fleeing serpent, right? Linking that up also with Revelation, I believe it's 20, that old serpent. Okay, so in here, when you link it up prophetically, right? Truly, as it says, his hand hath formed, which that word formed, one of the definitions there is pierced, right? So his hand hath pierced the crooked serpent, which ultimately, is identified or can be linked with Esau as well, right? When you look at this precept prophetically speaking, which will represent the Lord's judgment, all right, coming upon Esau, Edom, okay? And that's why I mentioned some of the dark sayings, above in this chapter. So verse 14, it says, "Lo, these are parts of his ways. But how little a portion is heard of him." Right. So it's like saying like he can do all of these things, and all the things Job just mentioned are only a fraction of the Lord's ways, a fraction of his capabilities. As it says, but how little a portion is heard of him. Right. Of all this, we still know only but so little about the Lord. But the thunder of his power, who can understand? So if he was to actually show his full power, right? Who would be able to understand that? Who would be able to comprehend that? And KJV, indeed, these are the mere edges of his ways, and how small a whisper we hear of him. But the thunder of his power, who can understand? And that brings us to the end of the book of Job, the 26th chapter. Lord willing, that was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rakha Kodash. And until next time, Shalom.